From at least May 20, 2010 until January 9, 2017, Montana Barronette, known on the streets as Tana, reigned over a neighborhood called Sandtown on Baltimore City's west side. TTG ruled the Sandtown Winchester community, advising that members strike fear into people through intimidation, and planned out shooting attacks. Tana was the leader of the vicious Trained to Go gang, leading by example when it came to committing crime. Tana himself committed murders, later being convicted on 6 bodies. Like other TTG members, he was known and linked to shootings, armed robberies, street-level dealing, and witness intimidation. During the time that the gang were active, they even joined forces with a gang dubbed YGG, the Young Go-Getters, for the purpose of doing paid contract killings in Baltimore City. With the amount of violence that they pumped out, it should come as no surprise that eventually, TTG was hit with a RICO. Here is the story of Baltimore's #1 trigger puller. To understand how Montana Barronette grew into the serial killer that he eventually became, you need to understand the environment that he grew up in. Baltimore, like many other major U.S. cities, faces a range of social, economic, and structural challenges. The city, which is located within the state of Maryland, has some of the roughest streets and highest violent crime levels within the nation. The city has struggled to control the high rates of crime for decades, and with rising homicide rates, segregated neighborhoods, and failing school systems within poor communities, it should come as no surprise that many of the youth grow up to idolize and eventually become gang members and pistol-wielding criminals. With a lack of quality education, widespread city corruption, limited job opportunities, and an abundance of abandoned homes, many people have little chances for prosperity. For many children and teenagers, getting fast money is the way to go. Therefore, becoming a dealer is the go-to profession. Crime offers an easy way out, with the youth failing to see the long-term pitfalls of making this terrible choice. For a way out of the cycle of misery and poverty, this is the option that presents itself for many. However, despite many children and teenagers desiring this lifestyle, some have other ambitions. For one young man growing up in the city, he had other dreams. Statistically speaking, Montana Barronette was destined to fail from the beginning. He grew up in the predominantly black neighborhood of Sandtown in West Baltimore. Like many black children, he was raised in a household of women, with his father having been deported back to Jamaica when he was 4. Barronette's mother was in his life but was a bad influence. She taught him and his siblings about the drug game. Nevertheless, even with his mother setting him up for inevitable failure, his grandmother attempted to raise him and his siblings, taking all of the kids to her local church. Montana and his siblings were bullied because of this decision. To his grandmother's credit, she had helped to take care of him, his sister, and 2 half-siblings. There were a lot of mouths to feed, and she tried her best to support the family through working a job as a custodian for Baltimore City Hall. Still, the fridge oftentimes remained empty, and the kids usually roamed the neighborhood. In spite of his grandmother being a positive woman in her community and really making do with what she had, the environment surrounding Barronette was toxic, to put it bluntly. His grandmother was often working long hours, being away from home, and so with an open-air drug market operating day and night, the threat of corruption and temptation on a young child's mind was overwhelming. Barronette's community wasn't exactly a place where many positive male role models existed either. Environment plays one of, if not, the strongest factor in determining the future of a child. Essentially, growing up in Baltimore's Sandtown neighborhood provided you with one of 2 options: the regular, what many refer to as lame route, working a regular job, most being minimum wage options. Or, the street route. Obviously, Barronette chose the second route. But, at the start, he had other plans. Contrary to what many may have presumed his outlook to have been, Montana Barronette grew up somewhat liking and trusting the police. Him and other neighborhood kids occasionally took trips down to the police station to ask for candy. The tension and mistrust between the community and police evidently existed, given the community holding the highest incarceration statistics for the entire state of Maryland. However, children were yet to adopt the same mindset as the older generations. It should be mentioned that as a child, Montana Barronette had even wanted to become a police officer when he grew up. It is crazy to think that, given what eventually transpired, Montana Barronette's future optimism and career aspiration changed when he was picked up for stealing a car. By this stage, Barronette was already running errands for local dealers, selling heroin. The manipulation tactics employed by older gang members proved successful in corrupting the mind of young Montana. Children are shown fake love, kindness, and rewarded for taking part in crime. The cycle begins, and only gets worse, with the same children eventually adopting the same mindset, mentality and behavior as the older criminals. With each generation, the violence becomes more extreme, as was the case with Tana and TTG. Tana's older brother was incarcerated in February 2012, and Tana was now in charge of TTG, Trained to Go. The gang consisted of neighborhood friends and many members had family ties. The gang's name had been taken from a 2010 Waka Flocka Flame song, and was formed to sell gear in the neighborhood. Montana had a distinct nickname, and relished his street reputation, being someone who boasted about his exploits on social media. He often wore gold caps over his front teeth, giving his smile a shiny glow, and this helped to distinguish him from other local gang members. Montana Barronette was running the show, and still continued communicating with his brother, who was behind bars for a few more years. The pair had peddled all manner of substances throughout the community, and Tana continued learning how to become more successful in his criminal ventures. He was homeless but widely popular, even fathering 2 children. Perhaps, it was his grandmother's influence of some kind of formation of structure, but for whatever reason, Montana Barronette actually attended school. He played football and basketball, managing to graduate in 2013. Furthermore, he had applied for a program that taught people how to drive trucks. Coming from such a deprived background, Barronette's planning out of his future was definitely abnormal for someone in his position. A petty verbal dispute turned deadly when Barronette approached some females who had just moved to Sandtown. Tana was small and skinny, not being very intimidating to those who saw him on this day. Despite the fact that he was selling pills in the community, his big eyes and smile, which displayed gold fronts, had everyone dismissing him. When 23-year-old Alfonso Williams, the brother of the females, overheard some of the comments made to his sisters, he and some of the people in the neighborhood responded to Tana. The verbal dispute became slightly aggressive, but ended pleasantly, with Williams shaking hands with Tana, before inviting him to come over to watch the Mayweather-Maidana fight. Standing outside his residence awaiting a food order, Williams never saw it coming. Tana, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, left an alleyway, raised a .40 caliber pistol and opened fire. The sound of gunshots had everyone on alert, and by the time that people investigated, Williams was in a bad way. He had been hit 9 times, later dying in hospital. The fatal bullet had traveled through his neck. Despite the street code of no snitching, Tana was named as the shooter and eventually found himself in custody. He wasn't fazed by having been picked up, as being convicted of a murder was highly unlikely in the city of Baltimore. Tana had been in the area earlier in the day, selling some pills, and there had been a minor argument between him and the victim. But, it involved other people, and the motive wasn't really concrete. Tana even provided an alibi, although this couldn't be verified by CCTV surveillance. When he couldn't be properly linked to the crime, he was let go. Typical Baltimore. To make matters worse, this young, wild and feared killer was returning to the same community. His brazenness to kill a man who had tried to make peace with him is telling. Even more telling was what police found on his phone. Tana had made a rap song about the murder. Evidently, the diplomatic style of approach to dealing with Tana had proven fateful for Alfonso Twin Williams. 21-year-old Terrell Hell Jarrett had been involved with mishandling a young go-getter rapper's money and gear. Upon being confronted about mishandling them, he slapped the YGG's rapper. This act of disrespect led to a hit being placed on Jarrett, with rumors saying that it was in the thousands. Whilst he played dice, a gunman approached and shot him in the chest and stomach, leaving him deceased. John Binky Harrison and Tana supposedly carried out the murder. Tana later phoned his brother in prison to brag about the crime. 24-year-old James Buddha Blake and 22-year-old Ronald Langley had contracts placed on them because they'd tried to abduct a man associated with the YGGs. They kidnapped the wrong guy, robbed him and then fled. This terrible decision threatened TTG's product supplier, and when money was put on their heads, Tana and Binky pulled up to collect. Both men were killed, with one being set on fire and discarded out of sight. Tana's murders were becoming like something out of The Wire, with this being one of his victims who wasn't found at the original crime scene. 3 men, including Binky and Tana, were driving down the street when they saw 32-year-old Brian Beasy Chase, a member of BGF, a well-known Baltimore prison-based organization. Chase had been telling people that Binky had been green-lighted, a phrase meaning that people were after him. With an opportunity lining up, Tana and Binky got out of the car and followed him. By the time that Chase realized the predicament that he was in, it was too late. Caught in an alleyway, he was shot. Surviving the initial bullet wounds, he ran before collapsing on the ground. At which point, he began crawling in a final bit of desperation. Both shooters finished him off, leaving his face in dog poop. Tana provided the 9mm handgun used for the killing of 28-year-old Marks Jones Jr., who had repeatedly robbed a 13-year-old TTG member. This same child put on a mask, before shooting Jones in the face, the bullet hitting out his front teeth. The murder had been ordered by Tana, who had picked the child up following the killing. Lamont Dirty Randall was another BGF member. Randall wanted TTG's turf, and Tana initially tried to calm things down. However, when peace talks never came to fruition, Tana was paid $10,000 to get rid of his rival. Tana, Binky and 2 other TTG members would ride down the street in 2 vans. 2 men hopped out, with Tana, who was wearing distinct Air Jordans, proceeding to fire at Randall, shooting him 17 times. 2 other people had also been killed during the shooting. They were 53-year-old Jacqueline Parker and 34-year-old Gerald Thompson. The increased rate of murders within the city of Baltimore was alarming. The Baltimore Police Department was corrupt, and rarely patrolled Sandtown and other violent neighborhoods of the city because of the crime, and heightened community tensions following the death of Freddie Gray in April. Now, not all of BPD was corrupt, and many wanted to see the community return to some semblance of normality. They could do this by removing TTG. It should be noted that the FBI wasn't all that interested in bringing down Barronette. They weren't interested in taking on the TTG case because murder cases are difficult to prosecute, and there were more high-profile groups in the city. Sure, TTG were involved in distribution, but they weren't a massive organization, and infiltrating and surveilling them was not an easy feat. A group of determined law enforcement detectives would start an investigation into TTG, specifically focusing on Tana. The investigation was underway, and with the help of an informant close to the group, evidence was beginning to accumulate. Meanwhile, Tana killed 24-year-old David Day Moore. Moore had murdered Tana's friend, and the murder had been seen by him on video. Tana was furious, and him and another TTG member put on face masks, before proceeding to shoot him 19 times. He died at shock trauma a short time later. 22-year-old Dominique Shotgun Harris was chased down by 3 TTG members, being shot in the heart and lungs. He had sought revenge because he had been robbed by Binky earlier in the day. TTG, specifically Binky himself, got to him before he could lash out. The federal RICO warrant was approved at the end of 2015, and now mobile phone wiretaps and undercover buys were allowed. Tana was aware of the investigation, but him and TTG continued participating in crime, especially killings. When not stalking and killing people, Montana Barronette and TTG were making lots of money. They often flew out of state to Miami, California, and Atlanta, in order to live the high life and spend cash. Tana had even been pictured swimming with a dolphin in Florida. Barronette was given the location of Antonio Thug Addison, and another man named Andrew Johnson. Both had been spotted sitting in a car, with Addison being targeted since he was friends with Johnson, a suspected law enforcement cooperator. Tana arrived at Johnson and Addison's grandmother's residence, firing at Antonio Addison, who was by now outside on the steps of the home. He died as a result of his association to Johnson. Following nearly a year of gathering evidence, Montana Barronette was arrested and charged with the 2014 murder of Alfonso Williams. This was a state charge, enabling police to get Tana off the street. In short succession, the remainder of TTG were booked on different charges, and even more 2016 murders were linked to Tana and TTG. Sat in an interrogation room, Tana was shown the photographs of 12 deceased people, all considered to be his victims. He laughed, and claimed to have known 8 of them, from seeing them at school or having personally interacted with them. However, he didn't admit to the murders, and was confident that he'd escape his current murder charge. Montana Barronette was supposed to have been moved from Baltimore Central booking to a federal facility. However, he was mistakenly freed from the facility altogether. Tana was perplexed by this decision himself, having likely already reserved himself to a life sentence. Now, he was being let go. Tana went clothes shopping before traveling up to New York, in order to watch local Sandtown resident Gervonta Tank Davis fight Jose Pedraza. Tana was soon arrested at his girlfriend's house, naked, and looking particularly angry. Inevitably, Tana was given a life sentence for his involvement in 6 murders relating to his gang TTG. His story is typical of someone growing up in Baltimore, becoming involved in drugs and death, resulting in lifelong incarceration. Tana will never see the streets again, and despite his many bodies, the illegal accumulated money and expensive trips across the United States and abroad, all he is now is a reputation. This is something that he always wanted, but it isn't what it's cracked up to be. I'm sure that he is hurt by the fact that his children will never be able to embrace him. This story is definitely a painful one. Rest in peace to his many victims.